Welcome back. Fake news. It's a term almost as common as football these days. And while some might like to think of politics as a contact sport, doubt about the accuracy of the news that we use to inform our vote can undermine our entire political system. So what's the cause of this fake news phenomenon, and what can we do about it? Well, for insight, I'm joined by someone tonight with a unique way of looking at information. She's Cindy Otis, a former CIA analyst and the current vice president of analysis for the Alethea Group. And she's also the author of the new book, True or False. Cindy, it's great to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks so much.
All right, so I was flipping through the pages the other day to just get a sense as to this interview setup, what we're going to talk about, and I noticed the first chapter for the book starts off with Jack the Ripper. I was not expecting that. Explain how Jack the Ripper fits in with the whole notion of fake news.
Yeah, so my book is both a history and a guide, and it starts with going through a couple of very well-known sort of historical cases, prominent figures from throughout history, prominent events and things like that, really focusing on, individuals and events that most folks have heard of, and Jack the Ripper is certainly one of them. And I walk through sort of how the issue of fake news was used in each of the events that I talk about. And Jack the Ripper is one. I think most of us have heard of Jack the Ripper. He has this very sort of monster-like, almost sort of ghostly-like reputation these days. People are still actively studying the time period of Jack the Ripper to try to uncover who he actually was, because the police never discovered his identity. And a lot of that has to do with the fake news at the time. So going back, Jack the Ripper was an infamous murderer that appeared first in 1888 in London. And he targeted women as his victims in this part of London called Whitechapel. And throughout this time period that was known as the Autumn of Terror, he killed at least 5 different women. This particular part of London was made up of primarily immigrants and people in a lower socioeconomic status. It's where you sort of went if you wanted to find a bar or a brothel, a lot of workhouses and things like that. And this murderer targeted these women and brutally murdered them. And it set off this rampant period of false information and sort of sensational journalism as newspapers in London and in fact the world, because this gained global attention, tried to uncover who this person was. And they reported on rumors, they reported on, things that they had heard different people say, speculation about who this person was. And it ended up being a very dangerous time period in particular because people started to point the finger at immigrants and claiming that they had seen, men around the area who, looked a certain way, who, didn't have a good command of the English language and things like that. And it ended up resulting in a lot of anti-Semitism and, physical attacks against immigrants and things like that as these rumors really started to take off.
Well, Cindy, so what's the parallel between this kind of Jack the Ripper vignette, and you've got some other examples in the book, and this fake news issue today, and the idea of scapegoating or just making things up to make a certain side look bad? As viewers and as news consumers, what is it that we ought to do to, I guess, protect ourselves and our republic against this fake news effect?
So, as I show in my book, throughout history, one of the things that has really allowed fake news and what we often call disinformation to thrive and spread has been playing to people's emotions. So what we saw in the Jack Ripper time that we now see today on different political issues is these rumors, the speculation and the false information that was reported really played on people's fears. Jack the Ripper became, this infamous figure that everybody sort of, this boogeyman, right, that everybody sort of feared. And so the false information, it spread faster because people were afraid. That's something we're experiencing now in this current political climate in which people are, spreading potentially false information about things like national unrest, The global pandemic, of course, has instigated this time period that us in the disinformation field call the infodemic, because of the sheer amount of false information that's circulating on a daily basis. And it's primarily being shared by folks not knowing that the information that they're sharing is false, but being shared because, frankly, we're afraid. This time period is a very scary period. We're trying to figure out, the extent of the pandemic, how the virus can affect people and things like that. And so false information really, it does very well in a time period like now when our emotions are very high.
When they see it on social media or they see it somewhere, what are the telltale signs that this is probably not the most truthful thing, I shouldn't share it?
So the very first step is sort of taking a pause. As I was mentioning, that emotional component is really huge. And people who are intentionally spreading false information, they're trying to tap into that sense of emotion and trigger a strong emotional reaction from us so that we won't stop and ask questions about, is this information accurate? Where is it coming from and all of that? Instead, we'll just share. And so step one is really take a pause. When you see some content online that makes you have a strong emotional reaction, take that break and then start to do some investigation. And these are things that anybody can do. You don't have to be, a former CIA analyst to employ these techniques, but it's things like if it's a social media account and you don't actually know the person and they're sharing, certain claims or information, do they cite anything that you then can go and check and verify? Do they point you to a website or an article that you can read for yourself? You really want to follow through with those steps of seeing where the information is coming from and not just believing what's immediately sort of posted on your social media feeds and then sharing it.
Yeah, because it seems like people just push things along all day long on Twitter or on Facebook. I'm not picking on those social media platforms only, but it just seems like this is where you get most of that kind of behavior. Cindy, really quickly, the other thing I think to focus on for people is to just, look at a variety of sources too. If you see something's going on, don't just go to that one go-to you usually want to read from. Make sure that you've got more sources out there saying the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's largely because our brains are wired to look for and automatically find information that confirms what we already believe. And so reading from diverse sources is one of the ways that you can combat that natural tendency to find sort of self-confirming information.
Cindy Otis, tremendous advice. I hope we do better at taking it. You're the author of True or False. Cindy, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Brian.
And we'll be back after this.